And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending upon where you're joining us from around the globe. My name is Robert Leake. I'm the Director of Marketing here at eFolder, and I would like to welcome everyone to our webinar today, where we're partnering with Auvik to talk about the 10 ways MSPs can be more efficient across your business. We're really excited to speak with you today. Appreciate everyone spending a little time with us. Before we get too far in, I wanted to just a few housekeeping items. We are recording today's session. So this will be sent to everyone who's registered, and you can also find it on our social channels under both the eFolder and Auvik umbrellas. So keep an eye out if you happen to miss anything or you'd like to go back. We are also doing Q&A. If you have any questions that pop up throughout the broadcast, please just pop something into the GoToWebinar agent that should be on your screen, and we'll address those as quickly as we can. And again, we'll be doing Q&A at the end, but again, if you have any thoughts or questions come up throughout, please let us know and we'll address as quickly as we can. And with that, I just want to take a moment and introduce our speakers. With us today here at eFolder, we have Tom Watson. He is our Director of MSP Best Practices. Tom was actually a previous MSP owner for over 15 years and successfully exited his business just a couple of years ago. He's been working in information technology for over 20 years, and outside of the myriad of things he's doing in eFolder, he's driving our MSP Ignition program, where we are focusing on MSP best practices, sales enablement, and really the tools and resources to help your business grow a little bit more. He has a bachelor's from the University of Arizona and a master's of science in management with a concentration in IT from Tom, I'm not going to say this correctly, but I know you have 22 technical certifications, and if you want to say hello and tell us where that MBA came from.
Hi, thanks, Robert. That was from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. And I just also wanted to say I'm looking forward to this. I like discussing best practices for MSPs, and turn it back over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tom. Also, joining us from Auvik, we have Patrick Albert. He's the Associate Vice President of Product Management. He's been in the MSP space since 2005, where he started working in the ISP, with an ISP in a rural area, and really developed his appreciation for network management. He rose through the ranks at a MSP software vendor after leaving that first job, and then brought his talents to Auvik, where he continues to pursue his mission of creating efficiencies and enabling the MSP success through automation. So welcome, Patrick.
Hey, welcome, thanks. Apparently I should be having like a snowboarding picture in the background here. I think that would have been great.
Yeah, well, you being from Denver, we try to bring a little bit of edge to it. But yeah, next time we'll definitely have you on the snowboard. Pardon me. All right, jumping into today's agenda. Before we get too far in, we're going to give you a quick overview on who eFolder and Auvik are. Then we'll dive into some network efficiencies with Patrick, and then really talk about some best practices, business practices efficiencies with Tom. As I mentioned earlier, we're doing Q&A throughout. We'll certainly have touched on some that we don't get to at the end, but again, if you have any thoughts or questions, just pop them over to us. And with that, we'll dive right into really who is eFolder. We've been evolving a lot over the years. You can see there that within our suite of solutions, we're covering a lot of different aspects of your solution stack. We'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end of the webinar, but we did want to let you know that we are 100% channel focused. We bring about 15 years of experience to the channel, where we've grown our business and partnerships with over 3,000 MSPs. We have about 300 employees globally for enterprise data centers, and recently headquartered ourselves here in Denver, Colorado, as mentioned before, where not only are we enjoying the wonderful IT tech community, but everything that the mountains bring. As you can see there, we also have within our solutions a lot of certifications, compliance, and really address the encryption and security needs that you need to with data protection. At this point in time, Patrick, I'll pass it over to you to jump in with your Auvik interview and take us into the content as well.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot. So those of you that don't know Auvik, so we're a network management solution designed for MSPs, so complementing existing remote management and RMM functionality. So, much like most vendors, obviously 100% channel focused, and we're actually headquartered out in Waterloo, Canada, about an hour outside of Toronto. So just similar weather, pretty cold. And as you can see at the bottom, we have a beautiful mascot, which is a polar bear. very world-renowned at this point. In terms of the company itself, we'll get into a bit of what we offer and what types of features we have. But as a company profile, we have about 100 employees and just over 1,000 partners. So I guess I'll move right into some of the specific actions and kind of some of the tips we really wanted to provide here. The first was really around creating network maps. So starting out with your first engagement with a prospect, it's really important to make sure that you have an accurate inventory. So obviously you can quote them the right services and the right price points, but that'll directly affect your profitability later down the road. So you can charge them the right amount and ultimately understand kind of what you're walking into, what risks there are, and what's out there effectively. So are there old types of devices on there, or any potential threats. But also past that, even in the prospecting phase, this is your first opportunity to really impress and really wow a prospect. So having a really powerful network map, so going out and doing that establishes a lot of confidence that you know exactly what you're doing and you've got this. Now, the challenge is it's incredibly time consuming and it's incredibly labor intensive. And and from our perspective, we see a lot of people going on site and doing these things, which is a fantastic idea. I think it definitely supports making the right decisions around understanding who your customer is, but it's very expensive. And we're seeing a lot of MSPs spending 5 to 12 hours going on site and going through and understanding what's what and what devices are where. And sadly, there's always the odd equipment that's out in the closet that you never actually pick up on. So I've been at a ton of MSPs where I was going on site helping them just do a quick network assessment, and ran a discovery in an environment, kind of trying to understand what's out there, and so, while someone's just looking around, and completely missed a device that was literally drywalled into the wall. We know what happens. The strangest things end up happening to these networks, and it just makes sense to hide it sometimes. But so ultimately, it's expensive to actually go on site and perform all this functionality yourself, mapping things out, drawing things out yourself. But it's incredibly easy to miss things. So that's where our kind of stop creating network maps by hand comes in. And importance aside. So we talked about kind of the investment that you have to make in actually going out and doing this on site. Not every MSP has the ability to go into a customer and say you're paying for this. A lot of the times it ends up being unbillable hours, or tacking on kind of an onboarding fee to a prospect, which obviously isn't a nice surprise sometimes to end customers. So ultimately, it's really important to do, but it's definitely an expensive thing to do. And then once the customer is actually onboarded, having an accurate network map absolutely helps speed up troubleshooting. So techs aren't either guessing or relying on really old stale information. So they're going in when they're troubleshooting a particular issue and they're trying to understand where things are and what devices are out there. Having stale or old information is probably even worse than having no information, because they're going to make the wrong assumptions and potentially go down the wrong troubleshooting path. So again, coming back to the cost of that, incredibly expensive to actually go out and maintain these things. So really what it comes down to is automation is really the only answer. Being able to actually go ahead and keep this thing completely up to date, having a real-time view of this. Again, both selves helps on the prospecting side, but also on the troubleshooting side. And then kind of, as a segue into, network mapping isn't really just about trying to understand what devices are on the network. It's also about kind of understanding what's out there and what is actually physically plugged into each other. So much like network mapping as a whole, it's incredibly time consuming and expensive to understand what's out there and what thing is actually physically plugged into what other device. Again, it's great to see that a specific desktop's plugged into a specific switch, but a lot of the times you actually have to understand what port and where are those actually physically connected. And again, incredibly huge investment to be able to actually map this out by hand. So this is one of those things that's typically skipped by a lot of MSPs. Again, trying to understand what devices are physically plugged into each other. And that can also lead into some pretty expensive support calls, and obviously potentially even sending someone on site. So we actually come across this scenario really frequently where one of our MSPs is scanning an environment and comes across a customer that, they're walking through their environment and they just notice a cable that's unplugged or kind of dangling from a switch. And in the goodness of their heart, they're trying to they're like, oh wait, this thing looks like it should have actually been plugged in over here. It looks like it would be the perfect spot for it. There's one spot left, and in the goodness of their heart, they go ahead and plug it in. So trying to avoid issues, and also depending on how your contract is with them, they might be also trying to avoid a bill. But they're not the experts. They don't know this network, and they also don't understand the implications of plugging something back in, what that might actually do. So they don't understand that they might be causing broadcast storms, switching loops, etc., which can grind their network down to a halt. And then from your perspective, it's almost impossible to troubleshoot these scenarios unless you know what has actually happened recently and what's been plugged into what. So being able to have an accurate, up-to-date mapping of what ports are wired to what and where those things are actually physically plugged in avoids having you to trace these wires by hand. But again, it's much more important around actually trying to avoid the cost of these troubleshooting calls. I've seen techs on calls for hours where they're trying to diagnose a problem, don't know what it is. They're reverting configurations, swapping hardware in and out, just to go on site and say, oh wow, this really shouldn't be plugged in here. So that could have easily been avoided by actually having a real-time view of what wires are plugged into where. And then, on a similar note around configurations, now we titled this slide, Stop Doing Manual Config Backups, because I want to assume that everyone is performing backups regularly, and maybe that is a manual task, but the reality is, I've been there. One or two things just kind of gets put on your plate, and you have to keep deferring. I'll do the backup next week. It's fine. Everything's okay. And that's not necessarily the wrong call. It's just you're incredibly busy, and it's not the easiest thing to go off and do. Going into every single device and taking a backup or a snapshot of its configuration. Again, it's one of those things that easily kind of gets pushed down to the bottom end of the priority list. And again, not necessarily even for the wrong reasons, but it just gets pushed down to the bottom list, and it just gets deferred and deferred and deferred. And that can cause a lot of problems, especially around kind of risk mitigation, but also to provide good service to your customers. Because the reality is that lightning strikes, hardware fails, floods happen, and these things cause huge impacts to both your business and your customers if you can't recover quickly. So the end customer, if they have a device that failed, and hopefully and luckily you have another piece of hardware that you can swap back in that's fairly similar and offers the same kind of functionalities as they had before. You going in and plugging that in doesn't necessarily get their business up and running immediately. There's often a bunch of hours of downtime as you're sending a tech on site to manually rebuild that configuration. Again, hopefully this doesn't happen too often, but when it does happen, it has huge consequences to both you and your customer. Because again, on the customer side, maybe they're down from a business perspective for a while. Maybe they're not able to actually process transactions. And from your side, you're sending a tech out there for hours and upon hours, and I'm sure that wasn't scheduled in your plan for the day. And then even worse than that is when you have nothing to base your configuration off of, so you're sending someone in that knows the network well enough, they've probably worked with that customer for a while, but by no means can anyone perfectly reproduce the configuration that they had previously. So the other impact that happens here is, a couple of weeks down the road, customer calls up and something's just not acting the way it used to, or acting right, or something slower than it used to. And again, not having a backup, being able to just go back and see what actually was there, it can often lead to incredibly long troubleshooting calls of just not understanding what that configuration was before and what it should be now, and kind of getting to the point where we're saying, oh wow, we missed this particular rule that has to be in place. Again, huge cost from your perspective that you're likely absorbing because you didn't know that rule was necessarily in place before. So again, documentation's incredibly important there, but actually having a configuration backup on file is absolutely critical. And doing it by hand is an incredibly time-consuming and expensive task, especially as you're doing it across all the different devices, across all of your different customers. And then the other part of this is, let's say in a perfect world, the hardware is awesome and it never fails. Well, you're still going to be making tweaks and updates to this configuration over time as either the customer's needs change or security needs change, new measures need to be put in place. And as people are going and modifying these configurations, again, there's, you can have the best person working on this, but it's almost impossible to completely and perfectly predict what change is going to have what implication. So the smallest little tweak could actually have profound implications that they couldn't have anticipated, even though they're your best guy. And having the history of that and backups is critical to being able to take a look and say, oh wow, this guy last week made this change. Oh, is that when the issue started happening? Oh, let me go ahead and just try to revert that change from last week. That can save you countless hours on the support side and frustration on both ends. And again, this is lots of importance here around backups. I think we've the topic of backups is critical to every conversation, and network devices are often either not included in that conversation, or again, they are kind of low on the totem pole in terms of priority for the month. So that's another critical thing, is stop doing manual backups, and just as importantly, start doing them if you're not as well. And then kind of moving on to kind of sticking on the troubleshooting theme is around VPN tunnels. So I think there's a couple of different situations where we see a lot of MSPs setting up VPN tunnels. The first is on the monitoring side, so being able to get into their customer's environment to actually perform monitoring. So that that is definitely something you want to avoid. You don't want to have a VPN permanently connected from your office to your customer's office. So having a monitoring tool that it can go inside that environment and get all the data and report back is critical. But the other side of things is, as your technician's actually trying to remedy a situation or troubleshoot a situation, having them set up VPN tunnels into your customers' environments just so they can get access to a device behind the firewall is equally prone to challenging situations. Things like password management, that's just yet another password that you have to rotate on a regular basis as a tech leaves or something happens in your environment. And it's also not a great customer experience. It's a lot of extra steps if you have a customer on the phone. So ultimately, a great solution there is having remote control directly to all the different assets within your customer environment in a one-click style solution. So whether that is a server, a workstation, a printer, or a network device, covering your bases across all these devices is equally as important. Again, the password management is a topic that's been coming up a lot, really, a lot of challenges around password management, and it's really important that another password doesn't have to get entered into the mix. So if you don't actually have to set up a VPN between your customer and your office, that's just yet another thing that you're preventing from a security perspective. And then kind of the overall theme here is really ultimately kind of getting to the point where you can stop passing network issues up the chain automatically. We see, especially in the small to medium MSPs, and that actually perpetuates even in the larger ones, where someone gets on the phone or sees a ticket come in and it's network related, and it immediately goes to your most senior guy because he knows networking. That's a really common scenario because the reality is network engineers are super expensive and they're really hard to find and really hard to maintain. So if you have a solid one, make sure you keep them happy. But at the same time, forcing every single network issue onto their plate isn't necessarily the best thing or the best use of their time. So it's all about trying to empower your L1 and L2s if you're following that style of model, or your more junior techs with the right tools to help them solve problems quickly and easily on their own without having to escalate immediately to another technician. And another common scenario that we see come up is, if a customer calls up and saying, hey, I'm having problems reaching Office 365, my mail is really, really slow and it's really affecting my ability to work. Well, from a technician's point of view or a junior technician's point of view, they're on the phone with this customer, and which path did they take is ultimately a big question, right? So is it a problem with this Office 365? Is it a problem with their computer? Is it a problem with their network? These are all potentially going to different experts. So not even just passing the buck to the next person isn't necessarily just the issue. It's passing it to the right person when it actually does need to be. So empowering them to actually understand that this is a network issue, or maybe this could even just be a malware issue on that one specific computer. So empowering them with the right tools to, if they can't solve the problem, at least help them understand what types of issues should be going to the right person. So you're optimizing your resources across the board there. Because again, with the Office 365 scenario or any other service, if they can't reach it in a timely manner, that could be a variety of reasons. That could be malware on the computer. It could be malware on another computer that's slowing the network down. It could be someone's downloading updates or performing a backup, slowing the network down. There's a wide variety of root causes, and having your junior tech trying to look at everything and cross things off arbitrarily or just randomly, it can obviously lead to a fairly poor customer experience, but a fairly expensive customer journey and support cost there as well. So empowering them with the right tools is absolutely critical to being able to stop them from passing the network issues up the chain automatically, and also passing it up to the right people when it makes sense as well. So that's kind of the last major tip there. But the punchline is basically, managing network infrastructure by hand simply isn't efficient, and it's really, really hard. I talked a bit about network engineers and how expensive they are, how hard they find, and if you have one, work hard to keep them. But the challenge there is, even if you have the best person, you have to make sure that they're constantly trained in the newest, latest, and greatest technologies. And that's complicated. We see tons of new vendors, new firmware versions, and new makes and models enter the market all the time. And with each of these, there's little tweaks to how things are done and how commands are done and what commands are done here. And it's fairly expensive to even maintain, to stay on top of that. So networking in general in its current state is fairly hard. And that's ultimately where we can come in. Auvik can help you identify these particular endpoints, these particular pain points, and help you solve it in a fairly similar way to how you're probably already solving endpoint and server management with a traditional RMM. So again, very, very complementary to an engine server RMM. So giving you the extra visibility into and the management capability of network infrastructure as a whole. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass this back.
Excellent. Patrick, thanks so much for all those tips and tricks as it relates to really being more efficient on the network side of the house. Thank you so much. We'll be coming back to you towards the end of the call, but so then I want to turn it over to, again, Tom Watson, Director of MSP Best Practices, and we're going to dive into the other side of the coin. So Patrick gave us a lot of tips on the network. As it relates to the business and some of the efficiencies that we can see on kind of how we're running our businesses these days, Tom, can you start us off by understanding about what we mean by billing via PSA agreements?
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, I have a big thing. If you're going to have an MSP and you want to scale ever, you need to have a PSA tool, professional services automation tool. ConnectWise is a well-known one. Salesforce has some pieces of it, Autotask, that kind of thing. But my big thing is that they all have within them the ability to bill your agreements out from within the tool. And amazingly, I still see a lot of partners of eFolder here and other places that are still billing through another tool such as QuickBooks, which doesn't give you the integration that you'll get when you do it through your PSA. Your PSA, you can set it up so that it's billing automatically a certain time per month. You can send them out in batch mode. But the big thing is that it allows you to know what resources are actually going out to a client, what they're paying for, and it allows you to deep dive into the data that's going to allow you to have the analytics to find out if these agreements you're doing are profitable. So if you're not using a PSA tool, got to get one if you want to scale your MSP. And if you have one, then I really recommend learning how to bill within the agreement section. Next, we have billing in advance. So I was able to sell my MSP and do pretty well with that because I switched over back in 2008, 2009 to billing everything in advance. So there's many MSPs out there that have a mixture of this, but many people will do the work and then send the bill out and then wait to get paid. What I did to flip it around, I wanted cash flow at the beginning of each month, especially with how things have changed in the MSP world, where you're often paying for goods and services up front. Many of the vendors out there, the SaaS services, are going to require payment, and you can end up in a situation if you're billing after the fact to your clients that you're actually losing money on some of those services because you might be putting them on credit cards or have late fees, that sort of thing. So I tell everyone, whenever you can, send people a bill for what you're doing, and have it under some kind of agreement, but send it out at least 2 weeks in advance and require payment before the month starts. And I know it's painful out there, and I used to have to send technicians out. I'd wait till someone needed a call, and I'd say, you can't start work until you have the check, and send me a picture of it. Because once you train your clients on this, they will understand it. If you tell them, I'm providing you antivirus, and I'm providing the hosted exchange, and all of these other services, and that I have to prepay for them, they'll understand that you can't give them the same expectations of what they're going to get from you if you're not paid to be able to provide them those up front. So once again, just to recap on that, find a way to bill before you go out there and do the work.
Hey, Tom, we've got a question come in from Lars out of Milwaukee, and he's curious, did you have much of a challenge with your existing clients in moving to this type of model?
Well, there is some challenge in that, and I would say when I moved, I probably lost 10 to 15%, but the ones that didn't get it weren't really the ones I wanted. And the conversation to have with people is, when you're discussing an agreement, you explain and show them those line items of all those things you're providing, especially the SaaS services, and explain, I can provide these to you because I have a subscription for these. I'm able to bundle everything into this package. But in order for me to do that, I need my money up front to make sure that I can deliver those services to you every month. And most people get it. And I said, though, if they don't get it, probably time to move on from them because they're probably not going to get the entire managed services approach if they don't understand this. So the way I transitioned my business to prepare it for eventual sale was, and whether or not you want to sell it to the same rules, is that I put everyone on multi-year agreements that I could, with some exceptions. But almost always 2 and 3 year agreements. You want to get people in the habit of understanding you're providing a service, you're investing a lot of time in their business. And in order for it to be profitable for you, you're going to have them have some type of guarantee from them. And I often went with 3 year whenever I could. And that's sometimes a little scary to people because it's like, wow, I might have a 3 year agreement, but might not be able to make sure that, I'm making money in the 2nd and 3rd year. You can have an automatic clause for escalation in cost. You can also do things like, I would always tell you to have limitations in there. And I'm sure people have contracts out there where you've given them everything in the kitchen sink and it kind of hasn't worked out well over time. I would recommend that you make sure that it only handles up to a certain number of computers, certain number of users. It goes over at some point, but that you have those agreements in place and look at everything as an agreement. Maybe you have a client where you're like, I don't want to give them guarantees of this much of this or this much of that. Put them on an agreement that's prepaid hours. And then when it gets down to 2 or 3 hours, it automatically rebills. So you have their money up front. I consider those agreements as well. And you get your money then, and then you're not put at risk of giving them a whole bunch of goods and services that they may take too much of or take too much of your time. You're still in hourly, but you turn that hourly into where you have the money up front. Next, we have fewer vendor partners. This is something that I think is really important. The model of having MSP has changed a lot with the commoditization of the services that we use. So as we know, we all used to have Exchange servers out there, file servers, all of these things. We sold them once every few years, made a bunch of money on install, and we were needed to maintain them. And now we're often we're buying hosted Exchange and antivirus and a whole bunch of other tools from VARs and from SaaS companies, software companies, all sorts of vendors. But what happens is you end up with 10, 20, 30 bills a month, and it can be overwhelming, and sometimes it's hard to manage those. I like to look at, if you have one company that's providing you backup or is providing you hosted Exchange or whatever it may be, see what else they have. Because often if you go back to them and you're going to give them more money per month, they will often lower the rates you're paying for each one of those things. You'll go down to having fewer vendors you actually have to manage the relationships with, and your price will almost definitely go down for the individual services you're purchasing. And that right there can be the winner in trying to actually have a managed service agreement that's profitable. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you.
So referral program. I'm big on this. I grew my business through networking and referral programs. My referral programs worked very well. I included the information in my agreement and made sure people understood that I had this program. The people I targeted at my clients were office managers, because these people were often, they knew other office managers, they would go to other jobs. And what I would do is I would say, even if someone from a company went to another job, another company, if they took me with them, that I considered a referral. And I made this worthwhile. I hear people have these programs out there and they offer $50 gift cards, $100 gift cards, all kinds of stuff like this. I gave people straight up $500 cash after a new client had been with me for 90 days. So I'd gotten my money back. They had to sign a multi-year agreement, but I literally gave people $500 cash, and that kept it in their mind. A lot of these referral programs, especially, we're hit with them in all aspects of our life. If you want to have one that works, you got to make it sticky. You got to make them think about it all the time. Put it on your invoice that you have it, and make it something where people will think about you when they come across other businesses. And this worked great for me. I probably added 30, 40 networks over time with this, and the money seems big that you're giving out, but for a new client that you're going to make, hundreds, thousands of dollars a month off from then on, it's not a lot of money to even give 500. And you will get referrals if you do something like that, and it'll help you scale your business quickly. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you. And Tom, thank you so much for going over those business efficiency sides of the house, especially as it relates to, the point that Tom brought to the table relating to fewer vendor partners. What we want to make sure that everyone is familiar with at eFolder is we've really evolved our business since we've begun. And while we originally started with the backup product from a decade and a half ago, our leadership saw the fact that data protection was going to be evolving in just the marketplace as a whole, but specifically for MSPs as well, both from a technology perspective and the human resources side of their client's house that MSPs were supporting. And what we decided to do was take advantage of the technology and human resource shifts in the marketplace and evolve our suite of solutions to fit that. So where we went was originally with our anchor solution. That's our file sync and share, which every time I say file sync and share, it just feels like it's doing a disservice to what anchor really does. It certainly hits all the points, very brandable solution for you, but really gives you the ability to be in touch with your clients every single day. And I think that may be another business efficiency. The more times you can get your brand in front of your partners or your clients, it makes sure that they remember the value that you're bringing to them. We also invested in a company called Cloud Finder, which does cloud-to-cloud backup, specifically for Office 365 solutions. What we do is mail, calendar, contacts, OneDrive and SharePoint are coming soon, and provide the backup and the ability to receive some margin on Office 365 that perhaps MSPs are struggling to see today from Microsoft alone. We then went down the BDR road and it really touched on the fact that, what Patrick was speaking about earlier on backup challenges. Well, we've got two BDR solutions that we feel are really strong. Both have their own strengths and bring something unique to the table. With RevelBit, very focused on your on-site backups. It's a chain-free technology that really cuts out a lot of the maintenance time that you may be seeing from your techs today. And partnered with that, we just acquired Axient this past July and bringing a really quick, really slick cloud virtualization solution to the table. Soon to be, hopefully, probably about a year or so, we're going to be bringing these solutions together. But right now, we definitely have, depending upon what your clients are needing, the ability to provide a BDR solution that fits for them. So again, just to reiterate, these are our core solutions today. This is all our own IP, and we are really controlling the development and the progress of this and really bringing something to market that we consider to be truly the MSP market's most powerful suite of data protection solutions. I encourage you to please check out a little bit more online at efolder.net/products, where you can dive a little deeper on kind of what I've shared with you today, and also request some free trials if you're so inclined. With that, I want to pass the mic back over to Patrick. I think you've got a few closing moments, and I'll check out our question and answer as you go through this.
Yep, sounds good. Thanks. Yeah, so I think we talked quite a bit around some of the capabilities that Auvik has. So I guess the last but not least part is, the next step, if you want to take a look at us, is go ahead and book a demo. It's a great, easy solution. Our salespeople can go over it, kind of match it up, take a look at your customers and figure out what makes the most sense and see if there's opportunities for deeper network management. So you can go ahead to auvik.com/efficiency, and hey, you even get a $5 Starbucks gift card out of it too for booking a demo.
Excellent. Thanks, Patrick. We've actually got a question that's come in for you. Mary from New York was wondering about the stop creating network maps by hand portion of your Prezo. And is that something that, how would you recommend managing around that? Is that something that Auvik brings to the table, or what's the best alternative to creating maps by hand?
Yeah, so that's definitely something Auvik can do. So it's it's kind of one of our big pride points here is, if you deploy us into a customer, we'll actually go ahead and discover all the different types of devices on a network, and in a real time actually draw you a really nice network map that is both used by your technicians, but also you can present it to a customer as well. And that'll show you pretty much everything that's connected into the network, how things are physically plugged in, whether it's over, or if it's over Wi-Fi. And as I mentioned earlier, also what ports they're plugged into, which is great from a troubleshooting perspective. And it's completely real time. So as a new device joins the network or drops off or gets unplugged and plugged in somewhere else, we'll actually on the fly redraw that map. So your technicians always have the latest and greatest in their hands. But again, also a lot of people export it and kind of put it into a network assessment report as well.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Patrick. Tom, we've actually had a question come in for you as well. Joe from right here in Colorado was wondering about your multi-agreements portion of your speaking points. You mentioned some exceptions. What were some of the exceptions, and why did you allow a few of those 1-year terms within your business?
Well, sometimes you would have clients where they would not know if they were going to be in business at that point or acquired. They didn't want a multi-year agreement that might carry through, or you might look at some that you only wanted to give a limited number of years. You might be looking at what they're doing with their business, what might change for you. I did them all based on fit. If I had someone I was very comfortable with, I always went for a 3-year agreement, auto renewing as well. But also I had clients out there that seemed like you knew you put them on an agreement and they'd find some way to consume more of your resources than you were comfortable with, or that allowed you to make money. And then I would go in a way, not quite a la carte, but prepaid hours in an agreement type setting, but not giving them necessarily everything else. Or also there's clients too you'll take on that you say, all right, well, these guys have in-house IT, but they don't need all of these other things we're bundling into our standard managed service agreement. My thing is that I never locked myself into just having one. I had 3 primary agreements that I sold, and then I had the prepaid hours. But I usually could find something that fit someone that felt like the right client where I could make money. But I wouldn't just say no to them if they didn't necessarily want that standard offering I had. So, but protect yourself. When you come across clients that are not a great fit, either choose not to make them a client or put them on something that gives you the protections that you can still be profitable and manage the relationship.
Excellent. I think wonderful words of advice. Thank you, Tom. And I do believe, gentlemen, that we've painted a pretty clear picture today, because it looks to be all the questions that we've got to come in. Certainly don't want to keep everyone on the line unnecessarily. So first, my thanks, Patrick, to you for joining us and bringing the Auvik perspectives to the table today. Thank you so much. Tom, the same to you, and all the value you've brought to this conversation. And most importantly, to all those who've attended today's session, thank you for the time. We hope you've been able to garner a few new efficiencies, or maybe some different ways of thinking that you haven't had in the past. But definitely want to thank you for the time, and look forward to hopefully touching base in the near future. Look forward to seeing you next time.